Gentlemen, ladies, today we're going to be talking about willpower. We're going to be talking about what is willpower, why is it important, and how you can improve your willpower to succeed in life. This is probably one of the most important videos you will watch in terms of all the self-development content I put out. So let's just get started because this is an incredibly important topic. So willpower, what is willpower? Basically, willpower is the ability to do what you set out to do, even if it isn't fun, even if it's, tough, even if you don't want to. You set out to accomplish these goals in order to achieve results that are worth, going through all the stuff you don't want to do. The billionaire John Paul DeJoria said it best: successful people do what unsuccessful people aren't willing to. And I've heard this time and time again. I've read self-development books from some of the top leaders like Brian Tracy, and he's mentioned it, and then he's referenced billionaires like, Rich DeVos of Amway, who has said similar stuff. The difference between me and other people, this is Rich DeVos talking, is that the one thing that set me apart was I did the things that everyone else was too lazy to do. And by the way, Rich DeVos has also wrote a great book detailing his journey to success called Simply Rich. I recommend it. But the point of this video is to talk about willpower. Willpower is this ability to do this, and the great thing about it is very similar to emotional intelligence. It is something that can be developed and grown. Every one of us has this ability to get better at it. Unlike IQ or intelligence, which is fairly fixed upon birth, there are multiple variables of life that you have the ability, once you're aware of them, to get better at to increase your life. And the amazing part about willpower, now we're getting into why you want to increase your willpower, is that it will permeate to success throughout multiple areas of your life. Also, there's tons of science backing this up. Willpower is something that reflects upon multiple areas of your life in terms of how they do, and it kind of compounds on itself. So what's an example of this? Well, how well you dress, how well you groom yourself, whether you achieve your goals, and whether you do well in your career or business, these things are a reflection of your willpower. In the short term, maybe even for a few years, a guy or girl might be able to luck out, and maybe he gets discovered, or he gets lucky and he makes a decent, maybe he's rich or he's famous. But in the long term, over decades, can he keep that up? That is a measure of willpower. Can he set those goals? Can he restrain himself from doing drugs? Can he do the things that make him successful and keep him successful? Willpower is what allowed successful athletes to stay focused. It's what allowed some of the top players of basketball, like Michael Jordan, to do what they did. And willpower permeates to these areas. Will you achieve those goals that you achieved, make that money you achieved, and eventually, be able to provide for your family? Those are a partial reflection of willpower. It's not everything, but it's definitely a partial factor. And that's why I think willpower is essential to self-development as a whole. Now, how do you go about developing your willpower? Now, there's the right way and the wrong way. And quite honestly, throughout my various videos and articles I've written, I've gone into detail about how you can start developing your willpower. Quite frankly, all the things I've said about goal setting and all the things that some trusted authorities that I recommend, like Napoleon Hill or Brian Tracy, have said about goal setting, these things are all about, willpower in a way. These are the proper ways of developing willpower. Things like setting deadlines, measuring your goals, being able to track those goals. Now, here's the best analogy I can give you about willpower. And this, again, none of this stuff is just off the top of my head. These are based off a lot of books I've read on the topic, and a lot of science and studies in these books that back these things up. Some of the top ones I recommend, and I've gone through a few that aren't that good, but the ones I recommend, let me just give you the top 5, I guess. The first one is probably One Thing by Gary Keller. The second one is Drive by Dan Pink. And then the third one would probably be this book I have here. It's called Mate. And it's a book that has a great section on willpower, and it goes into scientific detail about it. Now, this book is specifically for dating for men, and it goes into a lot of extensive scientific detail on that. However, it's very practical, easy to read, and it also addresses willpower and all the goal-setting characteristics of it, just as it's been mentioned. However, I think the one thing I have learned about willpower, I picked this up from various books, but the analogy that I have found that works the best is to think of willpower like a muscle. So that means that willpower can be trained through exercise on a daily basis, but at the same time, it also means that it can get exhausted at the end of the day. Now, the danger of it being exhausted is that you are vulnerable when it's exhausted, while it's rebuilding, usually towards the end of the day. And unlike training a muscle at the gym, generally speaking, when you walk home from the gym and you're exhausted because you train your muscles hard, you generally don't have people attacking you on the streets when you're most exhausted, threatening your life. So it's not that much of an issue. However, with willpower, especially if you're a high performer, a top achiever who has a job or something that requires a lot of big decisions or stress, that's a huge issue. Or a lot of temptations. Maybe you have a lot of women that are tempting you or men that are tempting you. That is the big issue with exhausting your muscle, your willpower muscle at the end of the day. Because willpower is directly connected with decision making. And there's this thing called decision fatigue. And some people argue that it's why Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs always wore the same thing, the same hoodie, the same t-shirt, because they wanted to limit as many decisions as they could to only the big ones so that they wouldn't exhaust their willpower, so that they can make good decisions throughout the day and not be vulnerable to bad decisions throughout the day. In fact, there's been studies that track this, and they have found that judges, as the day progresses, they are less and less willing to let someone go as innocent as the day progresses, because they get more and more drained throughout the day, taking case after case after case. And they've also found that men are most likely to commit adultery or cheat on their spouse at the end of the day, because they have a stressful day at work, their willpower is drained, and they are most vulnerable to temptation. So what does this basically mean in a nutshell? It means, one, protect yourself from over draining your willpower and falling to horrible decision making that can cost you your company. The President Bill Clinton said that his worst decisions were always made because of exhaustion and lack of sleep. So the same thing applies to willpower. At the end of the day, you have to protect yourself. You have to put systems and people you trust in place so that you don't make horrible decisions when you're most exhausted, when that muscle is most exhausted. And you probably don't want to push it to that extent either. Set systems in place where your muscle is exercised, but not to the point where it is going to push you that far. Quite honestly, I think partially the reason that Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg dress the way they do is simply because they just don't care much about fashion, and they just don't know much about fashion. So I don't think it's completely about willpower or decision fatigue. Partially it's just fashion. I mean, me as well. I didn't know much about fashion. I would always just pick up the nearest t-shirt to me. However, that's why I said partially. Partially some of these things about willpower will permeate through. However, if you are aware of it, you can make better use of it and be more aware to protect yourself and strengthen that muscle group and allow it to permeate through your life in areas you want it to. For me, I realized that fashion is important, and so did even Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. When Mark went to visit China and meet with the president, he understood how important fashion was. That's why he wore a suit and not a hoodie to meet the president of China. So even then, willpower can be exercised. It took me some willpower to get up the energy to put on this dress shirt rather than the crazy t-shirt I was wearing before. So willpower is important. Now, I just want to conclude with how you can practice in strengthening willpower. Now, the biggest way is simply to set up a system of rewards and goal setting, as I've mentioned in all my previous videos. However, you want to avoid doing it the wrong way, which is simply to make it seem like if you don't do it, you're a bad person and you failed, because that just breeds resentment, and eventually that builds and builds until you let go and you eat a ton of ice cream, because all that resentment and holding back from fitness goals, you just break because you have set yourself up to think that this is a bad thing. Or you said something like, I can't do this, I have to study, and then one day you just quit. You just break because you pent it all up and you told yourself you're a bad person if you don't, and then all of a sudden you go party for a week and you do a bunch of drugs or alcohol. So that's not the way of doing it. And I learned that from this book, which goes into scientific evidence to back that up. Instead, this book recommends that what you should do is set it up so it's win-win. So you make your mind think, hey, I'm doing this not because I don't want to be a bad person, but because if I do it, I will win again and I'll get an awesome reward, because in 6 months, I'll be making twice the amount of money I can make now, and then I can go party or do what I want, or travel the world while still eating healthy and not doing drugs, but like I can do a lot more and spend a lot more on the things I want to. So make it a win-win. Don't perceive it as, oh, it's a negative, I want to avoid this. And of course, the final thing you can do is reward yourself. This comes from the awesome book, The Power of Habit. It goes into a lot of scientific detail on how habits form, how great habits and bad habits form, and how we can break the cycle. And they found that in every habit, there's always some type of reward process that reinforces it, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. For the bad habit, it's pretty obvious. It's that pleasurable feeling you get when you indulge in drugs or alcohol, or you're eating that unhealthy cheeseburger. That's the reward, that pleasurable feeling. And for a good habit, it could just be that feeling of looking yourself in the mirror and feeling proud to see that muscle definition on your chest or your arms. So it could be a lot of different things, but what you want to do is also reward yourself when you exercise these habits. Willpower is always being used when you're making decisions that are tough, or you're resisting temptation, or you're setting goals, or doing things that you don't necessarily want to do because they're hard or you're lazy, but you're pushing yourself, you're training that muscle to get better and better. And over time, it'll become easier and easier, and you'll be able to do more, just like a muscle can lift more weight. Now, it takes time. It's not going to happen in a week, but over a sustained period of time, you get better and better at it, and over time, you can accomplish more. And to do that properly, you want to reward yourself. I learned this, again, from The Power of Habit and from Brian Tracy, who stumbled across this himself without reading that book. And basically, find a way of rewarding yourself. So Brian Tracy, he did this with salesmen and sales teams that he trained. Every time they would make a call and successfully link up with a prospect and get online with a prospect, that salesman was allowed to drink a sip of coffee, or if you want to be healthy, drink their green tea, or sometimes Brian would have jelly beans or a piece of candy as a reward. So again, find a way to make it win-win. It doesn't have to be an unhealthy reward, because that kind of defeats the purpose, but be a little creative. See how you can reward yourself each time you reinforce a good behavior. And over time, it becomes a habit. Generally speaking, if you just want to ballpark, on average, a habit takes around 66 days, but that's just an average. So most likely that habit formation process will take longer. I know it does for me just because I'm worse than average, I guess. But for me, it can take, 90 to half a year to a year. And I'm fine with that. As long as it forms, I'm good. So that's another thing. And I think the last thing I want to leave you with in terms of just habit formation is Jerry Seinfeld's habit trick. So Jerry Seinfeld, I think he's made the most money in the history of mankind from TV through his TV show Seinfeld. I know it's ridiculous, but he's made hundreds of millions of dollars, and obviously he's pretty darn good at what he does. And turns out he has incredible willpower, and he trained himself. So I actually found this from a Life Hacker article. Apparently, this guy, I don't know if it's actually true, but it's on Life Hacker, right? But the point is, he met Jerry Seinfeld and he asked him how he was able to consistently do what he did every day and write jokes every single day of the year and never miss a day and get better as a comedian because of that. And Jerry told him, and this is what this guy wrote in the article afterwards, Jerry told him that it was very simple. He bought one of those calendars you could hang on the wall that showed every single day of the year. And every day he would cross out the day if he wrote a joke. And then after about a week, he had a little chain of days that he had crossed out that all connected. And all he said that you had to do was not break that chain. Just keep that chain going. Keep that chain going. And it sounds so simple, but there's something, magical of visualizing that and seeing that. So try it out. And I just want to throw in my last extra bit of advice. This is something I learned myself that just kind of works for me when the other techniques don't really work. So for me, I tried for years to develop a habit of consistently going to the gym. And what would usually happen for me based off my personality was I would go for 2 or 3 days in a row and aim to spend maybe 30 minutes to an hour there. I really wasn't even focused enough to set a specific time. So I was just however much I could do. And I would end up spending 3 to 4 hours at the gym. And the reason I did this was just based off my personality, where I would just be like, you know what? I can push it even further. I can push it even further. I'm at 2 hours at the gym. I can keep going. I'm just going to keep doing stuff. Guess what would happen? After 2 days or 3 days of doing this, I would just kind of burn out. I mean, I wasn't physically exhausted to that extent. I was still quite energetic, but I just wouldn't want to go to the gym anymore because I would think back and I'd be like, geez, I don't know if I have the time or energy to spend another 3-4 hours there. Even 1 or 2 seems daunting, and I wouldn't go again. So what did I end up doing to solve this? And let me just remind you that this might not work for you, but just use this as a model, because I use this to remedy what worked for my personality and my habits and what I tended to go for. I tend to be that guy who pushed to an extreme. So I remedied myself to fix that. For you, it could be different. But let me just share with you what I did. Very simple. I set myself a minuscule goal. And I told myself I had to leave the gym at that time. And even to this day, 90% of the time, I would still push past that. But I would still set very rigid standards. And generally speaking, within 2 to 3 minutes of passing it, or sometimes longer, but I would be very firm with myself to leave the gym after spending only 10 or 15 minutes there. Now, the point of it was to get it to a point where it was such a small commitment. 5-10 minutes a day, I can do that. To form such a habit, and that's what worked for me. Because it was such a small commitment, it didn't overwhelm me when I thought about it. I could keep to it consistently because the barrier, the activation to actually go to the gym, that hump, that push wasn't so daunting and overwhelming when I thought about it. So when I put that restriction of I have to leave after 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I was able to do it because it was such a small commitment and it helped me be consistent. And if you've ever talked to any fitness or health expert, they will say that it's better to spend a consistent amount of time every week rather than just 2 hours every 2 weeks. It's better to spend 3 hours a week, spread out every day, and that's what I ended up doing. And over time, I slowly increased that, but for my personality, I would set these limits and it would work really well. So hopefully that works for you. And I just think this whole video on willpower can be used as a constant foundational reference point to improve your life forever. Just keep watching this video, bookmark it, remind yourself, watch it again if you miss something, take notes, write it down. It can really help and it will push you to success. And I just think it's such a fitting video for me because when there's a will, there's a way. And my name is Will. And we're talking about willpower, which has will in it. And I really want to meet Will Smith one day because then there'll be two Wills who have incredible willpowers and there'll be two ways. I don't know what I'm saying. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace. Hope you like this video. Of course, if you're new to this channel is all about self-development and success. You can hit the subscribe button below for free updates every Thursday. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video.